A plane carrying rugby team players, along with their friends and relatives, was traveling from Uruguay to Chile. Suddenly, due to bad weather, the plane crashed into the terrifying Andes Mountains. "12 people lost their lives, and the rest survived." When the survivors got up and looked around, they found themselves surrounded by snow-covered mountains with nothing but snow in every direction. No food, no warmth, and no hope of rescue. Days turned into weeks, and hunger pushed them to a point where they had to make a decision that will send chills down your spine. This is the heart-wrenching story of Flight 571. How did the passengers of Flight 571 face this terrifying situation? And what was the decision they made that changed everything? This is not just a story, but a journey of human courage and the fight for survival. But the real question is, how did those who survived the crash manage to live for 72 days without food or water? Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571 began its journey on October 12, 1972. The flight was heading from Montevideo, Uruguay, to Santiago, Chile. On board the flight were members of the Uruguayan rugby team and team officials. The purpose of the trip was to attend a rugby match in Chile. The aircraft was a Fairchild FH-227D. The plane was flying on its standard route, but no one could have anticipated what was about to happen. Inside the cabin, there was an atmosphere of laughter and excitement. For everyone, this was just another adventure, a celebration of friendship and competition. Everything seemed normal. During the journey, however, pilot Colonel Julio Ferradas and co-pilot Dante Lagarara faced some clouds and a bit of weather uncertainty. Considering the weather's intensity, they decided to make an emergency landing at a safe location, bringing the plane down in Mendoza, Argentina. This unplanned stop was necessary because clear weather was crucial for a safe crossing over the Andes. Passengers used this stop as an opportunity to relax for a while. The crew waited for the weather to improve, and the next morning, after getting clearance, the plane resumed its journey. The morning weather was still not perfect. The plane took off from Mendoza, and passengers began to enjoy the snowy mountain views. Crossing the Andes was a risky task. Let's first understand why crossing the Andes Mountains is so challenging. The Andes Mountains are among the tallest in the world, with peaks reaching up to 22,000 feet. This region experiences strong winds, snowstorms, and turbulence that can disorient pilots and affect visibility. In some remote areas of the Andes, ground-based navigation aids are limited, making it difficult for pilots to determine their location, especially in bad weather. The thin air at high altitudes reduces engine performance, making it harder for the plane to climb or remain stable. To navigate such a high-altitude area, pilots must adjust the plane's performance, and any miscalculation can be extremely dangerous. The pilots relied on navigation and their training, but thick clouds and uncertain terrain caused errors in their calculations. As the plane approached the Andes Mountains, the weather deteriorated significantly. A blanket of clouds drastically reduced the plane's visibility, making it difficult for the pilots to navigate. This was when they decided to change their course, which took the plane into a risky zone. Due to the weather conditions and thick clouds, the pilots didn't receive any warning about the crash. They believed they had cleared the mountains and began descending toward Santiago. This was the most fatal decision because they were still in the dangerous zone of the mountains. At an altitude of 13,000 feet, the plane lost its balance and began to descend rapidly. Around 3:34 p.m., the plane collided with a peak. On impact, the right wing broke off, hitting the tail section and separating it as well. Some passengers seated in the tail section fell directly to the ground and lost their lives. The remaining part of the plane slid down the mountain slope for 700 meters before coming to a final stop. when the plane finally stopped, there was an atmosphere of suffocation and fear inside. Survivors slowly unfastened their seatbelts and looked around. There was silence everywhere. The pilots of the plane both lost their lives. Some passengers were severely injured. The fuselage of the plane had turned into a twisted shell, open on one side, allowing freezing cold air to enter. The survivors tried to gather themselves and began to assess their surroundings. Among the passengers, there was no qualified doctor, but two young men who were medical students provided assistance. One was named Roberto Canessa, and the other was Gustavo Zerbino. Roberto Canessa was a second-year medical student, while Gustavo Zerbino was in the early stages of his medical studies. Both of them used their medical training to help the injured survivors and became a vital source of support for their group during this difficult time. In this crash, many passengers were thrown out of the plane and lost their lives. According to initial reports, 12 people died in the crash. After the crash, the survivors hoped that rescue teams would certainly come to find them. They believed that news of their plane crash must have immediately reached air traffic control, and now it was only a matter of a few hours of waiting. And you might also think that perhaps the rescue teams saved them, but that did not happen at all. The reason why the rescue teams failed to bring them back will be revealed later in the video. Initially, when the plane lost contact with air traffic control, the controllers assumed it was only a temporary communication issue, which was common in such terrain and weather conditions. They waited for a while, thinking the flight would re-establish contact. But when the plane's contact wasn't restored, even after some time, and the flight didn't arrive in Santiago at its expected time, air traffic control became alert. This flight was officially declared missing, and search and rescue operations were launched immediately. These operations were a joint effort by Chile, Uruguay, and Argentina. Advanced technology and human resources were used in the rescue operations, but they faced numerous difficulties and challenges. Helicopters and military planes were used for air surveillance, flying over the snow-covered terrain and dense mountain regions continuously. Ground rescue teams were also deployed to search for debris or survivors in the more accessible areas of the Andes. However, snowfall and harsh weather severely restricted their movement. Despite every possible effort, the debris of the plane was so hidden that, even with repeated aerial surveillance, the crash site couldn't be located. The snow-covered fuselage was the biggest obstacle. Whenever a helicopter or plane flew over the survivors, they would cheer and shout loudly, hoping to be noticed. But due to the white color of the fuselage blending with the snow, the rescue teams couldn't spot them and flew past. The survivors attempted to signal the rescue teams by using their bare hands and makeshift tools to write large SOS letters on the snow. They hoped that this message would be visible from the planes above, but this too yielded no results. Even after continuous efforts for several days, no concrete evidence of any survivor or debris was found. The Andes' challenging terrain, snowy conditions, and the white fuselage blending into the snow made the operation extraordinarily difficult. Eventually, the rescuers concluded that after so many days, there were likely no survivors left, and everyone must have perished. Continuing the operation seemed futile. After 8 days of intensive efforts, the rescue teams decided to officially end the operation. On October 21st, 1972, the search for Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571 was officially called off. The rescue teams informed the public and the victims' families about this decision. It was an emotional and heartbreaking moment because it officially extinguished all hope for survivors. Families accepted this decision with heartbreak and helplessness, but their pain and grief might have been nothing compared to the actual struggle of the survivors, who were still trying to stay alive amidst the brutal weather of the Andes. On the other hand, the survivors were still making efforts to signal the rescue teams. They didn't yet know that the operation had been called off. The survivors learned of this news through a radio. The damaged radio of the plane was repaired, thanks to the collective efforts of technical students and survivors. Some of the plane's passengers had mechanical and technical knowledge. Among them was a survivor, Roy Harley, who had an engineering background. Roy, along with a few other survivors, worked on the plane's damaged cockpit and onboard equipment to improvise the radio system and make it functional. This became their only link to the outside world. However, this radio was only a basic receiver, not a transmitter. This meant they could only listen to broadcasts, but couldn't send signals. On October 21st, 1972, they heard on a radio broadcast that the rescue operations had been officially called off. The broadcaster cited the harsh conditions of the Andes and the lack of evidence as reasons for losing hope of finding survivors alive. Hearing this news was a massive emotional shock for all of them, as if their entire world had collapsed in an instant. Some felt numb, unable to comprehend what had happened. Others couldn't stop crying, while some fell completely silent. At this time, food was a huge problem for the survivors. After the crash, the food situation for the survivors was extremely desperate. The small amount of food available on the plane quickly started to run out. The initial supplies included chocolates, wine, biscuits, and a few small items from the plane's catering stock. But this food was only enough to last a few days. The survivors began to ration the food very carefully. Each person was given only a small piece of chocolate or biscuit to last an entire day. Those who were becoming very weak were given slightly more food, but even that wasn't enough for them. When the food stock was completely depleted, the survivors started to use the resources available on the plane to survive. They used seat covers and cushions for insulation to protect themselves from the extreme cold. When everything ran out and there was no hope of rescue teams coming, the survivors made a heartbreaking and controversial decision. It was a decision so shocking that you might shudder upon hearing it and wonder how they could have done it. But they had no other choice. This decision was to consume the bodies of the passengers who had died in the crash.
Is in the bodies of our friends. If you want to see your families again,
this difficult decision first came to the minds of Nando Parado and Roberto Canessa. Both were medical students, and they tried to understand this decision from a survival and biological perspective. However, this decision wasn't easy at all. It wasn't just about hunger. It was an ethical and emotional struggle raging within every survivor. When they shared this idea with the remaining survivors, everyone initially resisted. Many broke into tears, some expressed anger, and others remained completely silent. This decision was deeply connected to the respect and memories of their friends and loved ones. However, when everyone realized they had no other option and that this step was necessary for their survival, they reluctantly accepted the decision. Nando and Roberto were the first to take a piece. And quietly took a bite. This moment was highly emotional and heartbreaking. Everyone watched them silently. Some were in shock, while others were inspired by their courage and survival spirit. After this act, others gradually began to accept the decision, but every step was taken with respect and gratitude. And so, they started consuming the bodies of the deceased. For nearly 2 months, these people endured every hardship and suffering atop the Andes Mountains. The extreme hunger, snowstorms, freezing cold, lack of oxygen, and every challenge that could break human resolve, they faced it all. By this time, only 16 out of the original 45 people were still alive. Finally, the survivors decided that someone must go out to seek help, as it was their last hope. On December 12, 1972, almost 2 months after the crash, 3 individuals volunteered for the daring mission: Nando Parado, Roberto Canessa, Antonio Vizintin. These 3 were the most physically fit and mentally strong. They prepared themselves to face the extreme cold, high altitudes, and unknown terrain. For their journey, they took limited supplies: human flesh, their only available food source, some clothing, and handmade tools to assist them in crossing the mountains. This mission was the ultimate test of their survival and courage, and they took this step for the entire group. Initially, all 3 were on this mission, but after 4 days, Antonio was sent back to the crash site so that the remaining survivors could have enough resources. From then on, only Nando Parado and Roberto Canessa continued the journey. Their decision and determination became a turning point for all the survivors. Nando and Roberto continued their journey, facing high-altitude mountains, extreme cold, and harsh weather weather conditions. After relentless effort and 10 days of struggle, on December 21st, 1972, they finally spotted a shepherd named Sergio Catalan across a river.
To the land of the living. Yo creo que el primer
Their condition was critical, and Sergio couldn't hear their voices. However, he managed to see them. Roberto wrote a message on paper and threw it across the river, tied to a rock. The note explained that they were survivors and desperately needed help. It included their location, condition, and an urgent plea for assistance. When Sergio Catalan read the note, he immediately realized the seriousness and urgency of the situation. He informed his family about it and decided to notify the authorities without wasting any time. He rode his horse through challenging snow and mountainous terrain to reach the nearest settlement. Despite the difficulty, he didn't stop for a moment. Catalan informed the Chilean authorities about the survivors and shared the letter along with their physical description. His account confirmed that survivors were still alive in the dangerous and freezing Andes Mountains. Acting on this information, the Chilean government launched a rescue operation immediately. Helicopters were arranged, and an experienced rescue team was assembled to ensure the mission's success. The rescue team directed helicopters toward the crash site. Identifying the survivors' location wasn't easy, but Nando and Roberto had provided clear directions based on their journey. When the helicopters neared the crash site, the survivors used black bags and debris on the white snow to signal their location clearly. This acted as a visible marker for the rescue team. It took 2 days to evacuate all the survivors. Due to altitude and weight limitations, the helicopters could carry only a few people per trip. On the first day, those in critical condition were evacuated, and the remaining survivors were rescued the following day. When the news broke that some passengers of the plane had survived and endured so many days, it captured global attention. It became an international headline, and people worldwide learned about this incredible survival story. After being rescued, the survivors were taken to medical facilities. Their physical and mental health was assessed, and doctors began their treatment while also providing psychological support to help them process their traumatic experience. The story of Flight 571 is not just a survival story. It is a lesson in hope, humanity, and perseverance. It reminds us that even in the most challenging times, the human spirit can triumph. How did you find this video? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel to support us. Thank you.